I want to talk about all the good that's happening. You know, I typically focus on news that will help us become prosperous as people, the human family. But before I talk about what we can do to make sure we have wealth for our families and our posterity, meaning our future generations, can you let me in on what's going on in the global markets? And we talked about, real estate, rare earth minerals, precious metals, the automobile industry, all of the markets. And you're going to talk, so you're going to introduce another phenomenon that most of us haven't heard about as it relates to the world markets. What is going on the world stage that we need to pay attention to?
Well, currently the world is de-dollarizing, right? Everybody is
Mm,
fleeing the dollar.
okay.
So over the last 80 years, the world has been the U.S. dollar has been the world trade currency. So every
Mm,
country, whenever they want to do trade amongst each other, for example, if China wants to buy from Japan, they've had to use the U.S. dollar. That creates a strong connection to the U.S. for all of the countries that are using the dollar, and it has been weaponized by America, right? So if you go against the U.S., they will sanction you, right? They will hold
mm,
your money, and you will not be able to access that money. So a lot
oh,
of countries are now fleeing the dollar. They're actually selling their bonds, right? So the U.S. when we talk about the trade deficit, the one, excuse me, when we talk about the U.S. deficit between the amount of spending that we do and the amount of revenue that we bring in, we have $5 trillion in revenue that we bring in taxes, but we
mm,
spend $7 trillion. So there's a $2 trillion deficit. The way
okay.
we make up that deficit is by issuing bonds, right?
Okay.
So other governments buy those bonds. But what you've been seeing over the last year or two is these countries actually selling off these bonds.
Mhm.
And we are currently looking for more buyers. No one in the global market is right now buying the US bonds.
Mm.
So now you have the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the buyer of last resort. So
Okay.
yeah, so when nobody else buys, the Federal Reserve buys the bonds. All right. So by how they do that, they print more money, right? And
Mhm.
then that causes the inflation so that we incur the costs.
And the Federal Reserve is connected to the United States Incorporated. That's their monetary system, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So they've been buying up the bonds, which means that I would assume that it looks like the markets would be doing well. Is that how are they propping up the market by buying up their own bonds?
Yes. They're buying bonds and they're also buying up stocks. Right. So
Mm,
the stock market right now is artificially inflated because we have major corporations and the Federal Reserve buying up stocks to prop up the stock
mm.
market.
Okay. And we're going to get to this. Thank you for your question. We are going to have a question and answer period. I don't know if this is the right time to bring up this question, Mr. Lattimore, but someone wants to know. This is Alicia. I'm sorry, Alicius. Can you please touch on the government still meeting about the looming shutdown?
Yeah. So the government shutdown is actually due to the fact that we can't finance our bills. They're giving different excuses, but right
Right.
now we're actually literally, again, we have a situation where we cannot finance all of what we our expenses are, and
Mm,
so we're going to have to cut spending, right? um it's difficult for the society to accept how they're going to have to slash cut funding, right? So the best way to do that is with the government shutdown. So that is a perfect excuse for why we will see, for example, more jobs being cut in the
mm,
federal government. right? Well, this is going to be the reason why we're going to see more spending being cut by the government as well, right? So it's just like a household. If you have too many expenses, and you have more expenses than you have revenue or income, then you have to cut your spending, right? So America is looking at where we can cut our spending.
And it's interesting, they say the government shutdown is looming, as if they don't know that they already had planned to shut down the government.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because when they reopened the government, they said that they would only be extending it until January 31st.
It sure did.
And that they would have to come back to the table and agree on their expenses. So this is all about the finances of the government. How can we finance our debts?
And you had told me before that they didn't make enough money during the holidays. So I think that was you, that they didn't make enough money. So what they did was they shut down the government on September the 30th, which was at midnight, which led to October 1st, my birthday. They shut it down, but they reopened it November, December I think to generate spending between Thanksgiving and Christmas, but they didn't make they didn't make a whole lot of money. And so what they did is they did this panic spending by causing a storm, an ice storm across America, telling everybody we're going to have an ice storm. People rushing to the stores to buy things in a frenzy, panic spending. And what it looks like was probably because they didn't make enough money during Thanksgiving and Christmas. And now here we are at the end of January about to have another government shutdown. And like you said, they just don't have enough money. They'll try to do things to get you to spend money, but they don't have enough.
Yes. And even during the holiday season, because when you consider the holiday season, the holidays is the biggest time of spending in the country for the year. Okay. Right. So that's when companies are expecting to have an abundance of revenue coming in. Not only did they not make a lot of what they expected, but also there were a lot of returns on items that were bought after the holiday.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So that obviously affects these corporations even more. So they need money, and we're actually right now at having a liquidity crisis, meaning that we do not have enough cash as a country, right, to keep the economy afloat. Right so now, when you look at the financing of major corporations, right, the corporate financing, usually you usually get a 3 to 5 year loan, okay, and then you have to refinance your loan, right? 3 years ago, 5 years ago, these companies were getting loans at close to 0% interest rates. So it was what they were calling free money, right? So when the economy is doing well, it allows for the banks to lend out money without discretion, right? Without really looking at the books of the companies that they're loaning the money to. When you have a crisis, that's when the banks have to be more concerned about who they're lending the money to. Also, when you go back to the fact that you have to refinance these loans 3 to 5 years later, and we're at that point right now where these companies are having to refinance. They're not financing at the 0% interest rates that was previously given. They're now refinancing these loans at 6 and 7% interest rates, which that means that these companies actually cannot afford to pay the loans. So we're having a lot of bankruptcies that are occurring behind the scenes.
Is this why we've heard some rumors about, and it might be true, might not just be rumors, about Amazon laying off tens of thousands of people, and I think UPS even? Is that related to what you're talking about? Okay.
Yes. So UPS and Amazon, as you mentioned, just laid off about 15,000 people, I believe. Okay. That was just a few days ago. So they've been laying off a lot of people. And then you also, when you talk about liquidity crisis, people don't have money, right? So
Right.
over the last few months, companies have been overproducing with the expectations that they would have buyers, right? So now
Mm.
they don't have the buyers that they were expecting because people are in a money crunch. So
Mm.
the first thing that you do as a company when you have oversupply and you can't sell that, you start firing people to cut your expenses. And so companies are cutting their expenses by laying people off.
Okay. Okay. Whew. Okay. So we talked about, the bond market somewhat. Someone wondered, is it a good idea? I don't know if you give this type of advice, but is it a good idea for people to buy bonds in order to diversify their portfolio?
It is a strategy that most financial advisors give. In fact,
Okay.
the vast majority of financial advisors will say to invest 60% in stocks and 30%, or excuse me, 40% in bonds.
Mm.
But right now, this year and last year, they've actually, for the first time, been advising people to invest in hard assets, gold and silver.
Okay.
So, in fact, this is a time where people are not buying bonds. Right? So, I
Mm.
would be leery of the bond market. And if you do invest in the bond market, you should study it thoroughly.
That's something you told me a long time ago when I asked you, what should I invest in? This is when I was first thinking about gold and silver. You said, first of all, you have to invest in what you understand. So study. And then you said, invest in what you can afford. So always look at your budget and see what your budget allows. So I'm glad you said people need to study the bond market before they just dive in.
Absolutely.
Yes.